10 of my greatest black lightweights of all times, in my opinion, must include Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. In my opinion, Pernell Whitaker was the greatest southpaw who has ever lived. Now, you can take a look at fighters such as Lou Tenderler. Lou Tenderler was given that mantle for many years. This is before Marvin Hagler showed up. Marvelous Marvin Hagler would show up, and then that mantle would go to Marvelous Marvin Hagler. You had Michael second to none. But Pernell Whitaker, in my opinion, is the greatest southpaw because he was a master boxer and he knew how to befuddle you with the southpaw position. That's what southpaw is basically designed to do, is to befuddle and confuse an orthodox fighter. And so I give that mantle to Pernell Whitaker. Then I give it to Marvelous Marvin Hagler as the top two greatest southpaws of all times. Now, Pernell Whitaker, he was born January 2nd, 1964, and he died July 14th, 2019. I knew Pernell Whitaker very, very well. Could pick up the phone and call him anytime I chose to because I knew him that well. He was a stand-up young man. Stood 5'6". He was a lightweight, welterweight, and middleweight, and he had a 69-inch reach. He ended his boxing career with a record of 46 total bouts, 40 wins, 4 losses, 17 knockouts, and he was stopped once with 1 draw. He was never stopped in his career. His shoulder gave out on him, so he couldn't continue the match. But he was never stopped or knocked out. Ray Robinson had the same problem in 1952 in New York's Yankee Stadium when he was in a ring with Joey Maxim with 110 degrees heat. The weather had failed Ray Robinson, not the opponent. So just want to make sure we clearly understand that. He fought from November 15th, 1984 to April 27th, 2001. He was in the ring with fighters such as Raphael Williams, Alfredo Lane, Roger Mayweather, and Jose Luis Castillo. Now, March 28, 1987, he defeated Roger Mayweather for the NABF Lightweight Championship crown. Roger Mayweather was an outstanding fighter. He was a WBA Super Featherweight champion, and he defeated Samuel Serrano for that title, 8-round technical knockout in 1983. I had the pleasure of being at that fight. Roger Mayweather would be knocked out in 1 round when he took on Rocky Lockridge. The problem Roger Mayweather always had, he couldn't see the overhand right coming on the inside. He was knocked out by Julio Cesar Chavez. He was knocked out by Rocky Lockridge, all within a round because he couldn't see. That was his kryptonite. And in my opinion, that's Floyd Mayweather's kryptonite also. It's just that Floyd Mayweather has too many gifts to be hit with those kinds of punches. You need a man to come up who has the gift that Floyd Mayweather has when he was in his prime to be able to catch him with something like that. But Mayweather is basically done with boxing, so you'll never see that. And there's no fighters that I can see around that has that ability right now. I'm speaking in Floyd Mayweather's time with a guy today. They still don't have that ability, in my opinion. But Roger Mayweather was some fighter, man. He really, really was. And I give all credit to Roger Mayweather. I remember when he fought Alfredo Lane from Cuba. From Panama, excuse me. Alfredo Lane was from Panama. And Alfredo Lane is another underrated fighter. He just doesn't get the justice that he so likely deserves. Alfredo Lane had defeated Wilfredo Gomez. He was in a ring with Brian Mitchell. So Alfredo Lane was the goods. He was a very good fighter. Greg Haugen. Pernell Whitaker faced Greg Haugen. For the IBF Lightweight Championship strap, Greg Haugen had defeated Jimmy Paul for that title in 1986. I was at that fight. And Greg Haugen would also win and lose to Vinny Tasmanian Devil Panzienza. When Greg Haugen fought Panzienza, their 3rd fight, it was in Atlantic City Boardwalk, the same day that Bert Cooper would take on, Ray Mercer. And it was down the boardwalk from one another. So when the Vinny Panzienza and Greg Haugen fight was over, Vinny Panzienza had defeated Greg Haugen. Me, Evander Holyfield, and others, we walked across the boardwalk to go to the next casino to watch Ray Mercer and Smokenberg Cooper. So that was an interesting time in my life. Of the 100 things that I have seen and done in boxing over the years. I remember when Pernell Whitaker faced Freddie Pendleton. It was in Atlantic City. It was on the undercard of Camacho and Vinny Pazienza. They had 3 championship fights on that card. And Pernell Whitaker was not the main event. Vinny Pazienza and Camacho was. Pernell Whitaker got shook with a right hand. And it looked like Pernell Whitaker was going to go, but he was such a talented fighter, he was able to dipsy-do his way out of that situation. What impressed me with Pernell Whitaker the most was when he fought Ramirez, the second fight. It was in Virginia. I was at that fight, second row. And the performance that he would put on with Ramirez showed you the testament of the man, showed you the gifts that this man had, showed you the boxing skill. He looked like Ray Robinson in that fight. Now, I've always had quarrels with Georgie Benton and Duver while they were talking to Whitaker in the fight. Ray Robinson couldn't do it any better. Well, at least Duver said that. You don't tell a fighter something like that. No, Ray Robinson, you don't compare Whitaker to Robinson. Robinson is a much better fighter than Whitaker. However, his moment was so. But you don't tell a fighter that because you don't want his ego. See, you can't afford to have your fighter drop his hands with a fighter like Ramirez. He's a front-footed fighter. He punches very hard. And he will never stop. He's very tenacious. He's a 15-round championship fighter, and he will walk you down into the final bell. And at any given moment, as what happened in the second fight with Whitaker, he got tagged in the last round. So you have to be very careful. You don't boost his ego like that. But Ramirez was in the ring with Rosario. I was at that fight when he stopped Rosario in 4 rounds. I was at the fight when he fought Chavez, Ramirez. And that was to unify their titles. Ramirez was a very, very good fighter. He was in the ring with all of them. So I just want to give Whitaker credit for fighting Ramirez. July 25th, 1987, he became the USBA lightweight champion when he defeated Miguel Santana, 6 rounds. Hit him with a body shot. Miguel Santana used to train in Gleason's gym in Brooklyn, New York. Knew him very well. And he would dominate the sparring sessions there, but he was no contest for Pernell Whitaker. And this is what I'm saying. When you get a fighter like that, like a Whitaker, and you put a man in front of him, no matter how you do in sparring, when you get in front of a man like Whitaker, he knows how to finesse you. And that's what happened with Miguel Santana. February 18th, 1988, he defeated the IBF lightweight champion Greg Haugen in Hampton, Virginia. Greg Haugen, once again, Greg Haugen. I remember when he fought Chavez at the Alamo Dome. I was at that fight. But Greg Haugen used to live in Los Angeles, California. And he was a good fighter. Greg Haugen was a very good fighter. Remember when he took the title away from Jimmy Paul? I was at that fight. It was the IBF lightweight championship crown. And Jimmy Paul was a cronk fighter. Jimmy Paul was, in my opinion, he's underrated. A lot of people don't know who Jimmy Paul is. But he was a splendid fighter. He was the first fighter to defeat Todd Foster. Todd Foster was dominating the amateurs when he was an amateur in 1988. But Jimmy Paul was the first fighter to defeat Todd Foster. And Todd Foster, because he used to train a lot. Kevin Rooney had took over. I'm getting off the topic here. I can tell you hundreds of stories about fighters. But getting back to Pernell Whitaker. Pernell Whitaker would defend his IBF, he would defeat the IBF lightweight champion, Greg Haugen, and he would become the lightweight champion of the world. And then he would come back to face Jose Luis Ramirez for the vacant WBC lightweight championship crown. And he would defeat him, and he would now become a 2-time champion. And then eventually he would defeat Juan Nazario in Las Vegas, Nevada, stopping him in 1 round, and he would unify the title. I was at that fight. And that card was something else because you had Meldrick Taylor fighting his comeback fight after he was stopped in the 12th round with Julio Cesar Chavez. He would make his comeback fight with a Mexican fighter by the name of Primo Ramos. Now, Primo Ramos, Taylor beat him once before, but at the end of that fight, the police handcuffed the Primo Ramos, took him to the paddy wagon. I don't know what the charge was. It might have been a domestic dispute. I don't know. I don't want to give any false allegation. But I'm standing there at the aisleway and I'm watching the police come to the ring. And they handcuff him and they take him away. So Meldrick Taylor won his fight. Whitaker knocked out Nazario in the first round. And Hector Camacho fought, was it Baltazar? It was Baltazar. I forget his first name, but his name is Baltazar. He defeated Baltazar. And that was some fight. So you had 3 fights on that card. So Whitaker had won his third title when he faced Juan Nazario. Because Juan Nazario stopped Edwin El Chapo Nazario in Madison Square Garden. I was at that fight. And Whitaker was there. He had on a velour suit. I'll never forget that. Silk suit. It was like a silk suit. And he was walking, across the ring. And Camacho was drunk that night. He was walking across the ring, and he had on a suede suit. But Pernell Whitaker, he was in the ring with Jorge Paez. I remember when Jorge Paez had defeated a Philadelphia fight in 15 rounds. And his name was Calvin Grove. And he defeated Calvin Grove for the IBF Featherweight Championship belt. I remember when he fought Troy Dorsey. I was at all of those fights. So Jorge Paez was something else. He would do flips because he was in the circus in Mexico. So he'd clown around. He would have all these different kind of haircuts, Batman haircut and all kind of crazy haircuts. But he could fight. So I was at the fight when Pernell Whitaker faced Jorge Paez. I was at the fight when he faced Azuma Nelson. Azuma Nelson had Buffalo Martin in his corner. And Buffalo Martin was a very good trainer during those years. He also trained Julio Cesar Chavez when Chavez was in the ring with Meldrick Taylor March 17th, 1990. So Whitaker was also in the ring with Anthony Jones, who was a Kronk fighter. He was in the ring with Freddie Pendleton. Like I said, it was on the undercard of Camacho and Vinny Panzienza. He was in the ring with Howard Brazier. I remember when Howard Brazier was in the ring with Rodney Blake. No, Blake, his last name. I can't think of this guy's name now. Robin Blake. Robin Blake. And Howard Brazier was also in the ring with Meldrick Taylor. And Rafael Pineda, when Rafael Pineda knocked out Roger Mayweather, Pernell Whitaker would wind up knocking out Rafael Pineda. Unbelievable. But Pernell Whitaker, in my opinion, needs to be on this list as the greatest black lightweight of all times. He's an outstanding fighter. He was in the ring with so many outstanding fighters, so many great moments that I have seen. I was at the fight in Virginia. It was a lot of snow that day when he fought Roger Mayweather. And Roger Mayweather's shorts, because Pernell Whitaker had dropped Roger Mayweather, beautiful 1-2 piece combination. And then Mayweather had hurt, he had dropped Whitaker because Whitaker humiliated him in front of his peers by pulling down his shorts. Because Roger Mayweather's shorts was starting to fall down because the elastic wasn't tight. And Whitaker went over and pulled it down even more. And then Roger Mayweather would drop Pernell Whitaker. But that was an interesting card. It was in the second row of that fight. I was at the fight in Las Vegas, Nevada when he took on Oscar De La Hoya. I believe he defeated De La Hoya, but I'm not going to put my opinion on these videos. Many believe he defeated De La Hoya. Many believe he defeated Julio Cesar Chavez. I will put my opinion on that. He guaranteed, definitely defeated Julio Cesar Chavez. And he had those moments where he would get robbed many times. But I was at the Garden in his last fight, his last big fight, I should say, with Tito Trinidad. And that was his last brilliant moment when he got in the corner. He found himself trapped in the corner, so he would get on the bottom strand. And Felix Trinidad couldn't hit him with a handful of buckshots. He would get out of that corner, find a back door, as he did with Jose Luis Ramirez in their second fight. So shout out to Pernell Whitaker, R.I.P. to him, a hell of a fighter, belongs on this list. I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series, all Greek fights, and all Greek fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. I have witnessed so many sparring sessions with Pernell Whitaker, what he's done to these up-and-coming young fighters. It's a shame, but he's a showman, and he would take them all to school. He fought them all. He sparred with all of those guys. Mayweather's, all of them in sparring. They're all respecting him. There was a fight in Philadelphia. And Zab Judah, all of them guys were up-and-coming guys. And they were 1996. They tried out for the Olympic teams. But they were all good fighters. Zab Judah and Mayweather. And it was a lot of them. I'm trying to think of them on the top of my head. But there were a lot of these guys coming up during that time. Remember when you had Poison Julia Jones at bantamweight? You had Eddie Cook at bantamweight. So many guys during those years. So boxing has always been a great sport. And you always had great fighters, in their era. So shout out to Pernell C.P. Whitaker. Thanks for watching. Peace.